Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your host Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. It's Whiskey's favorite time of the year, Spooktober, so dust the cobwebs off your liquor cabinet and join us for Whiskey's Nightmare on a Rocks Glass. In tonight's episode, we discuss the very creepy but very funny Death Becomes Her. Don't forget to turn out the lights, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back to Reels on the Rocks. Happy spooky month, everybody. So this month we will be taking a look at some Halloween-appropriate movies, and we're calling it Whiskey's Nightmare in a Cup. What was it again?
Rocks Glass.
Gotcha. You can tell I didn't name this one. But anyway, so we're kicking off the month with a pick from Sweet Tea. Some of you may be familiar with it. I had never seen this before. It's called Death Becomes Her. I hardly know her.
So yeah,
all right.
Death Becomes Her. You know, this is a movie from 1992. You know, I saw this first when I was like 5 or 6. They used to rerun this like on Bravo all the time. And if you
so you had seen this before then?
Yes, I'd seen this.
Oh, you know what? I forgot. We forgot to introduce what we're drinking.
You are right.
Last month was beer for me. I switched over to a Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc.
Ooh,
classic. It's not a fancy company. I'm probably literally going to be drinking the same one next recording. It's a box wine called Bay Bridge. So I feel like it's a little bit more fall appropriate, and especially for this one because it's a little bit more sophisticated, like our leading ladies.
Very true. I'm over here. I'm drinking. I'm keeping it healthy, trying to keep my health in check. So I'm having water infused with lemon. So, very refreshing though.
Sounds like one of us is probably going to end up being more saucy than the other.
Yes.
But so that's good. I either had a feeling you'd heard things about this one or you'd seen it before. And you told me that this one's kind of big in the LGBTQ plus community.
Yes, it is. And ironically, that's not how I first heard of it. This is
if you were 5, I mean, I'm sure.
I was just in tune. This one is one that's actually, this was a favorite of one of my moms. She saw this when it first came out in 1992. I'll just say it's a very bizarre movie. It's lots of fun.
Well, and honestly, it's kind of, I guess it's got a cult following nowadays, but normally I don't do any research for your movies, but I was kind of curious because it's Robert Zemeckis.
Yes.
So this is what he did after the Back to the Future trilogy. Literally like 2 years after the third one came out, this is what he did next.
Yes.
And that fascinated me. And also the movie, I enjoyed it, so I was kind of curious how it was received, and it did perfectly fine at the box office. Mm-hmm. So the fact that it's kind of more obscure nowadays, I find interesting, because you would think that with its warm reception that it would be considered one of Zemeckis' other like good 90s movies. But again, I'd never heard of this until, not actually you. I didn't know that this was what I had heard of, but a YouTuber I like watching actually used clips from this movie.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
and that's when I made the connection that was the movie we were watching. I was like, oh, whoa, I'm excited.
Let me guess, they used, and maybe, I think you showed this to me or not, but I bet you they used the On Guard, bitch.
Well, it was yes, it was actually, but you've seen the video too because I sent it to
you.
It was the ContraPoints Envy video.
ContraPoints.
Which was I see why she used this movie, because that's kind of the point of the movie. It's about envy, more or less.
Yeah, it's one of the main flowing themes through it. So before we get too far into it, let's run through our stats here. We have directed by Robert Zemeckis. Music was by the incomparable Alan Silvestri.
He does all of Zemeckis' movies, and his scores are, like John Williams, I think, still is the best. He's the GOAT. But there are a couple of their composers that are at least just about at his level, and Silvestri's really great. I mean, the Back to the Future theme is awesome.
And and he's also done some of my favorite what's the way to put it? Some of my favorite, just not even like movies that are really about the score. but like the score for whatever reason popped out to me. I've always found I'm like, oh, he's the one that did this. Like, for example, I've always loved the score to the it's another kind of like rom-com from the 90s, but actually another bizarre movie called Soap Dish. He did the score for that, and I love that. And I liked the score for Made in Manhattan too. Just movies that are not really about the score, or where the score's not that big. I've always found the ones that he's done, I've actually found that I've kind of enjoyed it. They've been standout pieces for me. So yes, he's on this movie. It was written by Martin Donovan and David Coop. And it's starring Meryl Streep as Madeline, Bruce Willis as Dr. Menville, Goldie Hawn as Helen, and not really a cameo, but not really a main character, Isabel Rossellini as Liesel.
Oh man, when I saw she was in this, I was interested to see who she was going to be. And you know what's funny is because I showed you Blue Velvet.
Yes.
Which could be, well, I have an idea for a Lynch movie for next season, but she's such a different character in that movie. And it's funny, like, I've heard people describe her as, like, sexy, but the only movie I'd really ever seen her in was Blue Velvet, and it's so hard to really sexualize her in that role.
Unless you're
of what
Ross
she's
on
going
Friends.
through. But she's hot in this, man.
Yeah, she's very much like, I don't know, how would I describe her? She's almost kind of like a horror bombshell, sort of.
Well, we can't even talk about it because you haven't seen it, but I recommended, and to anyone listening, I'll recommend this as like a little side thing, but I recently, like a month ago, saw this miniseries on Netflix called Brand New Cherry Flavor. The story reminded me somewhat of this. If you've seen it, you'll know what I mean. If you haven't, go check it out. If you like kind of more body horror sort of stuff. But there's a character who's sort of like a witch doctor in that show, and it's funny, like watching this, not exactly the same character, but it kind of reminded me of, there's this Hollywood mystical person giving out like potions or whatever to different celebrities. It kind of reminded me of the same thing.
So as far as awards go, this movie was nominated for a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy for Meryl Streep. Didn't win, but it won a BAFTA and an Oscar for Best Visual Effects.
Yes, and I noticed that. And did you catch who did the visual effects?
Yes, I was actually going to get to that in a minute. I look at that now because this actually beat out at the Oscars. It beat out Alien 3 and Batman Returns. Kind of two sort of powerhouse established franchises.
I'd give it to this. Because I have some. I liked this obviously, but I have some minor points that kind of didn't click with me so much. And it's funny because you're going to get to it, but Industrial Light and Magic did the special effects. You know them from every movie. We literally just talked about them a few episodes ago with Terminator.
Yes.
And with this movie, it's weird because sometimes the effects looked really good and sometimes the CGI was really dated for me. So it was hit or miss. The fact that it was a comedy, I don't care, really. They could have been really dumb effects, and it still would have worked for me.
Yeah.
But I will say, some of the CGI, once the paranormal stuff starts happening, it looked like 90s CGI, so there was that.
So this movie, it had a budget of around $55 million, and it did okay at the box office. It made its budget back. It wasn't a huge success. It made $58 million. But this was actually a critical disappointment. Critics hated this movie. Roger and Ebert notoriously gave it a 2 thumbs down. They said the visual effects were amazing, but it lacked any soul or substance, which, I mean, it does to an extent, but it's kind of like the point.
Well, we can talk about it later in the episode, but my biggest issue with this was kind of the story. I would not go as far as to say it lacked soul or substance. I think that's kind of absurd because I feel like the point is it's almost sort of a fable, a sort of, I don't know. It's hard to really even explain, but my thing was the story took a while to take off, and by the time it got interesting, it was already over.
Yeah.
Because the idea, if this is your first episode, we spoil the movies, so
yes.
I'll at least say you should watch this, and maybe come back after you've watched it. But for those of you who don't care or have seen it already, just the sum up, the idea is that these Isabella Rossellini is a person who has like this potion that makes you essentially immortal. It de-ages you and it makes you unable to die.
Right.
And that is interesting, especially like in Hollywood, where and that's the thing too. Like in the climax of the movie, when Bruce Willis is kind of trying to escape her mansion,
Yeah.
you see all of these like different, Jim Morrison shows up and Elvis and all these other people who have taken the potion. And that almost feels like that should have been the beginning of Act Two for me. Like if this were going to be a really interesting movie,
Right.
but the thing is, it's not really a big story. Like essentially it's kind of this rivalry between these two women, and that's the story it's telling. And so it's not exactly a fault of the movie, because all it's really doing is it's just sort of showing this really destructive sort of rivalry that kind of ends up ruining both of them, and that's the story it's telling. But I feel like it had such an interesting premise to work off of that I was a little disappointed by the ending, to realize like, oh, this is it, like this is the ending.
Well, it's actually interesting that you bring up that you were disappointed by the ending. So before we get there, let me go ahead and just start kind of getting into the meat of what I want to talk about. And when I do that, I want to thank Misty Comedic Arts and in/frame/out, the YouTubers, for their comprehensive research on this film. It really kind of gave me sort of some background on it, and I'll be drawing on some of their research here. So, like, the first thing you were talking about is the special effects. The special effects, even back then, and actually, I think with I actually don't think they look that bad nowadays. They're not obviously.
No, not at all. I don't think they looked bad for the time. I'm saying now they look kind of dated. This was years before like another one that has really bad looking CGI by today's standards is Tim Burton's Mars Attacks. But at the time, that looked really good.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean when I'm calling it 90s CGI, and that it doesn't really look good now. Right. It's Industrial Light and Magic. They were the best. They have always been the best of the best. Like every, so if they did it and it looks bad, it's the best that was possible at the time.
Well,
Well,
I was going to say what's interesting about ILM working on this is they developed techniques that were used later from this movie. The biggest one that they came up with was being able to digitally recreate skin texture. Like, for example, the scenes where they're talking about like her head spinning around, or I think there's and like when she gets her head smashed in to her body, that they specifically developed the skin texture technology that went on and made some of the effects, specifically like the creation of the Tyrannosaurus Rex in Jurassic Park, the next movie they worked on, possible. So there was a lot of technological innovation that went on in making this movie that actually went on to make some of the most revered franchises in movie history.
For sure. I wouldn't doubt it. And that's the thing. Like nowadays they work on so many movies, it's hard to even really keep track of what they're working on. Cause I think almost like every Marvel movie is done by ILM. So, but
they're always trying to innovate. They're always working forward.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not surprised. And sometimes the effects did look really good too. I just, again, for me, there were times when it looked like 90s CGI. Like, still kind of, you could tell it's like video game graphics. But I'm not surprised if they innovated on anything. Especially, and that's a good point too, Jurassic Park probably would have been, if not their next project, the project after their next project. Because that was 94, I think.
Yeah, well...
Or was it? Maybe it was even sooner than that.
From what I was reading, was Jurassic Park was the next project right after they worked on this one.
There you go.
Which I find interesting, because this is he said this is a movie that people kind of forgot about. And it's a movie that really, innovated visual effects so that franchises like Jurassic Park could have the look that they had. And it was interesting, you were talking about Zemeckis earlier, and this was the movie he did between the ending the Back to the Future 3 and Forrest Gump. So this was sandwiched between two of his like powerhouse movies, and he said it's one that people like kind of forget about. But if you kind of look at sort of his history, it's not out of line with his projects. He also did like Roger Rabbit, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and just other movies that kind of are just quirky and odd. But also they seem to kind of lean more into using visual effects as a major part of the storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, and that's people don't think of Forrest Gump as a big special effects
Right.
movie, but the whole superimposing him into like historical stuff, like when he meets the president and he doesn't know he embarrassed himself or like said something about his buttocks or whatever. Like that was done with, I believe, Industrial Light and Magic, but that was like CGI'd into real footage from these events and stuff. So
I think
even that, but yeah, no, Zemeckis, I'm not surprised I kind of like what I said at the beginning. I'm more surprised that, considering that this did get a warm reception, at least from people, not maybe from critics, but it made its money back and it won an Oscar. So I find it odd that I don't hear about this movie as much. Like, this isn't something people really, as far as I know, like grew up with or anything.
Unless
So
you're
it's
me,
kind of,
apparently.
I feel what you're talking about. It's almost like the forgotten movie of a lot of people, like Goldie Hawn, uh, Meryl Streep, like everyone involved in this. I feel like no, I've never heard anyone say that this is their favorite Meryl Streep movie. Which, I mean, to be fair, she's got a lot of better movies to pick from.
Yeah.
But
Well,
and that too, like Bruce Willis. We kind of touched on this last year with Die Hard, but he's probably better as a comedic actor than he is. Like, I think the reason he's a good action hero is because he's relatable, and he's relatable because he's got comedy chops.
yeah.
But most people, I don't think, really think of him as a comedic actor because and you're a big Moonlighting fan, so
Right.
that's kind of,
And that's-
it's easier to think of him like that.
Yeah.
But he's pretty funny in this, and this is, again, a movie I don't think a lot of people would even remember that he was in.
Well, I watched a few interviews with some of the with the main actors and actresses in this, and a lot of what I was hearing was they were kind of called to play roles that we're not used to seeing them in. Like, for example, Bruce Willis was basically coming off of, I think, the second or third Die Hard movie at this point when he did this movie. Meryl Streep was kind of known for playing these more dressed down roles, and Goldie Hawn was kind of like the girl next door, sort of, or it's like that. And just seeing them all kind of play these parts that we're not used to even seeing them as. It was also kind of, it was kind of, I'm not saying it's innovative for that, because that's something that happens a lot, but it was, I guess it was very just different.
Well, what I find funny about Meryl Streep in this was before she was really picked up as being good at playing like a mean character,
Yeah.
or like an evil, like now everyone thinks of The Devil Wears Prada, but this was decade and a half before that, and I feel like most of the time she always played more sympathetic characters. So this was the first time she really got to be a bitch, and she's, as we know, is very good at doing that, and she was very hateable in this movie. that was kind of another thing that it's not really a weak point for me, but it adds to the comedy. And I think, well, like going back, so Goldie Hawn's character, I felt very sympathetic towards up until the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Up until she's like trying to murder Meryl Streep, I'm like on her side. And once that starts happening, I'm kind of like, oh, they're both terrible. But that's why it was funny to me. And we've kind of talked about this before, and I was planning on bringing it up because, like, when we talked about Election, I mentioned how it was funny to me because all of the characters were kind of bad people. Mm-hmm. And so watching them like screw each other over, or be have their not get their way, or so to speak, it's kind of the same with this, because everyone, like Bruce Willis's character is a shallow jerk, Meryl Streep's character is super vain, Goldie Hawn's character is so caught up with Meryl Streep that she's, and that too, the first act of this movie was super funny, just watching her like gain a bunch of weight and become a cat lady and get dragged out of her apartment.
Well, do you see what she's getting dragged out of? She's basically just watching Meryl Streep's character get strangled on TV in some movie.
Oh, for sure. But she's getting like forcibly evicted from her apartment, and that too. Like, I loved the when she's at the hospital and it's just like, you need to move on. You need to stop thinking about her. But in the same way, Election is funny because all of the characters are terrible people. That's kind of the same thing for me here. And I was kind of curious why you might think it works for you here but not there.
That's actually interesting. I've actually never thought of that. I'm trying to think of... The only thing that I can think of as to why it works for me here is because, at least for me, when I'm watching it, to me it's very clear from the very beginning that this isn't, that, as we would say on Reddit, this is an everybody sucks situation. And maybe it's because I don't get too invested in any one of the characters, because I tend to, for good or worse, I tend to latch onto a character as the beacon of hope. And like, I think you were with me when we saw Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and and I had a fit when the one person I believed in was a gross person, and I hated that. And I think maybe that's why it works for me here, is because, to me, it's pretty obvious from the beginning that this is going to be a sort of everyone sucks situation. And
Gotcha.
and I think maybe in Election, it occurs. It's not as late as it does in Eternal Sunshine, but it occurs late enough that I've already tried to glom on to somebody as the good person, and they turn out, they're not. Okay. And so I think it's because it's pretty well established, like I said, for me from the beginning, everyone's gonna turn out terrible here. Because something about the way that Goldie Hawn feels the need to, quote, test her new fiance is very off-putting. Right. It's very off-putting for me. And that's in the first few minutes of the movie.
It's so silly, and it's also why would you even try? Shouldn't you try and stay away from this woman if she's just gonna sabotage your relationship?
Right, or at least wait till you're married, because California is an equal property state. If you divorce the plastic surgeon, you'll get 50%. Girl, wait for that.
Right, but that actually kind of touches on why I think this one is forgotten so much. Is not necessarily because it's a bad movie. I think, even though Ebert said it in a less than flattering way, I kind of understand what he means, because I don't think this is meant to be a very engaging, serious kind of movie. It's supposed to be sort of a very light, goofy movie.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think, when he says it has no soul or whatever he said, I think that's a little much, but I think that maybe this one is forgotten a lot because it's just kind of a funny little story. It's not super, it's not going to blow your mind or anything. Right. It's just sort of...
Well, what's interesting is this opened the same weekend as the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie.
Oh God.
And this beat Buffy the Vampire Slayer at the box
everything
office.
Beat Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That movie bombed hard. Joss Whedon doesn't even like the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a bad movie. As a person who loves the TV show, it's a bad movie, so of course it beat Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Everything beat Buffy the Vampire Slayer when it came out.
So, what's interesting earlier is you mentioned about how the casting of Meryl Streep, and no one says it's Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep, in her interviews, it is quite obvious she did not really enjoy this movie. And I think at first I was kind of like, oh, you're being shady, but then I thought about it more and it kind of makes sense. So first off, it was interesting because she thought that she was going to end up playing, well, especially since what we now know of her, what we now know her as, our generation, when they think of their first Meryl Streep movie, they think of Devil Wears Prada, where she's already totally bitchy. Well, she thought she was going to be playing, when she was offered a part, she thought she was under the impression she was going to be playing Helen, Goldie Hawn's character, because she couldn't see herself as playing this super bitchy, over the top kind of drama queen character that she ends up playing, which is ironic.
Which is extra ironic, knowing what her reputation is on the set.
Right. She also said that she was like, oh, I'm not a singer, I'm not a dancer. But she also claims, though, in interviews that once she saw this opening with us, she was like, she claims, I don't know if I believe her, she claims she knew this would be a hit in the gay community from that alone. She's like, I'll probably walk into a club in 5 years and see this being reenacted. Now, that play that they're performing is, The Songbird of Youth, I think is what it's called, which is a Tennessee Williams play about growing old and losing your youth. So that was kind of like an interesting just sort of like Easter egg. But so she thought she was getting Helen's part. She ended up not getting. She goes through it, but she said she didn't really enjoy herself on it because she went on to say that she would never do another visual effects heavy movie because she felt that the movie was about the visual effects first and then the acting second. She called the process. She said it was like going to the dentist. There was like a lot of like waiting around and stuff, which is interesting because actors nowadays with movies having some sort of visual effects just normally, like actors who are coming to things nowadays, they know that doesn't really bother them. But when you go from like where she came from, with Kramer versus Kramer, and other movies like that are not visual effects heavy, it's really interesting that she's like, I can't handle this. So she vowed to never do another visual effects movie. I didn't look at her catalog though to see if she kept that promise, but she claimed that. She also said that Zemeckis is not an actor's director. Which I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of shady.
That's funny because I feel like every single other person who's ever worked with him said that he was a joy to be with. Especially, I know Bob Hoskins on Roger Rabbit said that he was like great to work with. So that's funny coming from her. Also, it's it'd be interesting. Maybe she should try again today. I know she swore off visual effects heavy movies, but with mocap being how it is nowadays, where they just scan your face with a laser. Yeah, it kind of allows you to really, look at Thanos in like the MCU movies. Like Josh Brolin killed it. Yeah, and he's a big, giant purple alien. And
who ironically also became, for better or for worse, a kind of demigod in the gay community.
Oh yes, But yeah, it's interesting. It'd be nice for her to give it a shot because I feel like she'd have a little bit more freedom. Because that's the thing. Now it's like very easy to be like a CGI character because of how much technology is advanced. So like outside of movies, I was really into like the behind the scenes of that new Resident Evil game. Especially because everyone was like obsessed with the tall vampire lady, and like watching the woman who played her like do her performance and stuff. It's kind of interesting how freeing it is because it's like she's in this warehouse and they have like her sitting on like children's sized things because her character is supposed to be like 9 feet tall. But other than that, it's like she's just getting to like act as if she's a giant, that's without having to wear like a crazy costume or anything.
What's interesting? That that reminds me of, and I think it's the same principle. Did you ever do the studio tour at Warner Brothers?
Yeah.
They have that scene where you could do that scene from Lord of the Rings where you depending on which side of the table you sit on, you either come across as the giant or the tiny person.
So that's a practical effect. So not exactly the same deal, but kind of a good example of like special effects heavy doesn't necessarily need to be heavy CGI. Yeah. I've talked about how I really like practical effects, but yeah, that's just forced perspective. That's something they've had since the beginning of filmmaking. So, but again, like this, you raise an excellent point. I don't believe her. I feel like she's done something that was special effects heavy since then, because it's been 20 plus years, so I bet she's been in something else that needed CGI.
And maybe it was the point, and also effects in the way that they're done now has progressed so much so that it's probably not like it was when she was having to do it, where
No, not at all. That's what I was trying to say about mocap. Like even 10 years ago, if you were doing motion capture for a movie, you had to wear this weird looking suit with a bunch of balls glued to your face and stuff, and now you don't even need to do that. You literally just wear like a spandex like one jumpsuit, and they put a thing on your head that like lasers your face, so you don't even need to like have stuff glued on there, and it just it's your face. Josh Brolin's face is Thanos's face. All of his facial expressions and stuff are captured, so he can act in like the most raw form in like a warehouse somewhere, just imagining that he's like a big purple space monster. And, so again, like I feel like if she did it now, it probably wouldn't be as irritating as it was back then. But again, I feel like I agree with you. She has to have done something since then, because I don't believe that.
Well, she told a story also of what she was on set one day. Like, for example, the scene where she gets up from falling down the stairs, and her head's on backwards.
Oh yeah.
So I saw they had some behind the scenes footage of that, and so she basically had this weird like blue bag on her head, and she had to like walk and stagger backwards for that. But she said that was the same day that her mother was visiting the set, so her mother just got to watch her just have this bag on her head. Which, you know, kind of, I mean, I'm not saying I'm with her, but I'm like, yeah, that's kind of not the day I want my mom to visit set when she can't even see me do anything. But that was pretty interesting. Well, you know, we talked about how Robert Zemeckis and Back to the Future, you know, there's actually a Back to the Future Easter egg in this movie. Did you catch it?
Oh, I'm wondering if I did. It's been a few days since I watched the movie, so now I'm like, what was it? Maybe I'll remember when.
So, do you remember when we finally find out Goldie Hawn's character also took the potion? And she asks her, when did you take the potion? And she responds, October 26, 1985.
Oh my god, how did I miss that?
Which is the day the first movie takes place.
I think I was too busy trying to piece together how long after she was in the mental hospital it was. Like, I was too into the movie to even think about the date. I was just like, oh yeah, so that would be this amount of time after she left. That's hilarious. I love... I'm so annoyed at myself. That's obvious. I should have noticed that.
Well, and like we talked about earlier, this movie, for whatever reason, audiences seem to enjoy it because they all went to go see it, but no one really took this movie seriously. And like, it had a DVD release that was basically ironically botched. Essentially, what is believed to have happened is they took the late, because this was released on Laserdisc. Throwback to my Laserdisc fans, I still love Laserdisc, but it was released on Laserdisc, but that requires different sort of transfers, and the image quality has to be different. So they instead of retransferring for a DVD copy, it's believed what they did is they took a Laserdisc transfer and put it onto the DVD. And what ended up happening is the image quality was so badly degraded that it was unwatchable. Like, nobody took this movie seriously, even after it was coming out on DVD. So I feel so bad for this movie.
I wonder how they fixed that, because the version I watched looked fine.
Right, because
so
now it's fine.
wondering...
It was just that initial release, whatever they did.
Okay, so they did find, like, I gotcha. Yeah, I mean, again, I wouldn't say this is a movie you need to take seriously, but it's not. It's interesting because it has a lot of entertainment value. Like, I find it strange. Again, we keep coming back to this, that no one talks about this one, or this isn't. I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, this is my favorite movie," or "This is my favorite dark comedy," or something. Because it is very entertaining, and I think that's kind of its strength. It's funny. That's what it is. It's a dark comedy, and it is funny.
You know, it's interesting because I think I've talked to you before about how I don't necessarily enjoy dark comedies, and I think one of the reasons why I'm able to enjoy this one is everybody is just so almost despicable in this movie that I really don't care what happens to them.
Well, it's like they're cartoon characters.
Yeah, basically.
Like, none of them have really any dimension to their character. It even doesn't make sense to me why Bruce Willis's character is suddenly not wanting to take the potion. Like, I know it's plot convenience. They need him to be, like, rejecting it so that there's some sort of, you know... like, so there needs to be like some sort of climax, and
right.
So like he's trying to escape them and stuff. But I mean, given his character throughout the whole movie, it's like, why would he not want to be young forever? Like,
well,
the guy is a complete narcissist, just like his wife.
I love that in/frame/out the way they put it. They said he is the beigest of men. But
he is wearing a beige suit for a lot of the movie.
Well, I think the reason why because at that point he's already seen the effects that it takes, the toll it's already taken on Goldie, I'm sorry, on Madeline and Helen's character, and he sees, and I think he's basically seeing that living forever is not all essentially it's cracked up to be. And because she even gives her that warning, take care of your body, and like all the other, as you saw in that scene at the party, the celebrities who were supposedly dead, how they're now alive. And they're taking care of their bodies, but he's basically saying, he's kind of like, well, it's one of those kind of like, I guess, like moral questions, just because you can, should you? And I think because he's already had problems with Helen and Madeline, he's like, I'm good, thanks. I think
for sure.
I want to ask you this because you are a horror, I like to use the term connoisseur.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Did this movie give you any sort of vibe from something you kind of from any other horror properties you'd seen before? I want to see if you got kind of a similar vibe before I spring something on you.
I'm curious, like, what you're gonna spring. Like, it reminds me a lot of the way the potion works. Kind of reminds me of some zombie movies, not the Night of the Living Dead ones, but Return of the Living Dead. And Dead Alive specifically, and in those, the zombies, it's not like you hit them in the head and they die. It's like they are always going to be alive. Like, unless you just like obliterate the body, they are going to keep coming back. And that's kind of, I got the same vibe with how the potion works, because Goldie Hawn gets her abdomen blown out and she's totally fine. And by the very end of the movie, when they all just like collapse into a bunch of body parts that are still moving on their own, that kind of reminded me of that. I know you're going to spring it on me, and I'm curious to which movie you're going to reference. I wouldn't call this a horror movie. I wouldn't call this like a horror comedy. Like, the whole potion thing is kind of spooky, and I do think this is a good Halloween movie.
I'd stick with dark comedy for this. I wouldn't classify it as horror.
This is also like a really good. I'm surprised I haven't seen more people do costumes from this for Halloween.
Well, you've clearly never been to a drag bar at Halloween.
Well, that's true, and I would probably vote for the person who's doing the It's the problem is that the costume would have to be really subtle, and you would have to be like have seen or be a fan of the movie to even notice that you're like, unless you do a really cool costume where somehow you make it look like your head's on backwards as Meryl Streep, it would be a tough one to do. But I feel like this movie warrants some costume attempts, because I feel like there's some good gems to come out of it. But what horror movie?
This was originally conceived to be part of the Tales from the Crypt universe.
Oh, that makes so much sense. This is like a Tales from the Crypt episode, actually.
Yes, that's basically
because that's the thing. I don't know if you've seen Tales from the Crypt, but even though they are like horror shorts, they're meant to be like very morbidly funny. Like there's one where there's like, it's a Christmas episode where there's like a psychopath dressed up as Santa Claus, like on the loose. So yes, there's like people being murdered by a slasher Santa, but it's also, the whole concept is so ridiculous that it's kind of hilarious.
Right.
And it's sort of the same thing with this. I could see like Goldie Hawn's character in a Tales from the Crypt episode being like undead and like wanting to like murder this woman who wronged her, and then taking a scarier kind of tone to it.
Yeah.
So that makes so much sense.
Well, what's interesting about this is because this actually reminds me of, because I think my parents used to watch it when it was like on still, or maybe it was reruns. I don't know. There's one episode I always remember, and it's where I think it's a plastic surgeon, and this actually reminds me a lot of this movie. I think his wife is having an affair with the cable man or something, and so he like walks in on them, and she's going, "Oh, I want your body," and so he basically removes, I think, her head and his head and switches them on their body. It's weird, but it reminds me of that episode a little bit.
Wait, that was the Tales from the Crypt?
Yeah, that was one of the Tales from the Crypt episodes.
And exactly, but that's what I'm talking about too. Like, that's really disturbing, but at the same time, it's like funny.
It's like over the top, right?
It's so, and I was a big fan of the comics too, which were also incredibly messed up but funny at the same time. So yeah, I'm not surprised that this was conceived as one, because it would make a great Tales from the Crypt episode. Just change a few things around. That also might make sense why it feels like such a short movie or short story. As I said, like my biggest problem with this was more that I was kind of disappointed that the story didn't go in a more interesting kind of direction. And if this were like Tales from the Crypt episodes were like an hour long, this would have been perfect if you cut out like the 30-45 minutes and like made it a little bit scarier.
Yeah.
Perfect. But it's still a good movie.
Well, I think for some reason I'm thinking, and maybe I'm like wrong, but I thought for some reason the director, I thought for some reason had some sort of hands in Tales from the Crypt, and I could be wrong. I thought I
don't think so. I don't think Zemeckis did.
Oh yeah, he was an executive producer.
Oh, I'm actually learning that for the first time then. That's cool.
So this was, and I guess the people who wrote it, let me see, their names were Martin Donovan and David Coeb. They talked about how they kind of just wrote this, and they were able to somehow get it sold to the people who do Tales from the Crypt, and then I guess Robert saw it, and I think he saw more potential in it, because there's actually, and I did not write them down, but there's 3 other movies that are actual movies that were supposed to also be part of the Tales from the Crypt universe, that were expanded on. But I just thought that was really interesting, because like I remember the Crypt Keeper, the Tales from the Crypt people, and I was like, just from my very limited experience with it, like I said, I wasn't like a hardcore watcher, I just caught whatever it was on, my parents were watching it, and I could see this easily fitting in there.
It's great.
It actually is interesting. I sent you the trailer to watch. Did you get a chance to watch it?
I didn't.
So
you sent it very quickly before we sat down to record, so I didn't get a chance to watch.
No worries, but they actually used the Tales from the Crypt theme in the trailer too.
Well, you talked about the score earlier, and that was something I actually kind of liked. Is the score by Silvestri really fit the tone of this movie, because it sounds spooky,
but it's like it's like
scary.
Yeah, it's almost kind of like
it's got like a gothic kind of almost. It felt like it would also fit in like a murder mystery movie.
Yeah, there was something that was just about it. Like you're right, it was spooky, but it wasn't scary. And like you said, it's very gothic-y. It's kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but you're right. It just somehow it just fits it.
Exactly.
It's kind of like gothic opulence almost.
Yes, no, that's a good word for it. It was good. I mean, Silvestri. You are a bigger fan than me, it sounds like, but I think he writes some good music, and this was I enjoyed the score to this, especially like in the opening credits when I'm still like, not really sure what this movie is even about, and as the credits are rolling, I'm like, okay, I feel actually that's kind of funny, because it has this like very like spooky tone, and then the opening scene is that ridiculous musical number. It's like and thank you for explaining that, by the way. That was something I was actually going to ask you, was what that play was, because I felt like I was missing something, because the characters walking out in disgust mention
they're just like,
very quickly like, oh, why would they make this into a musical? And I was like, what is this play about? And I thought maybe watching the musical number I would explain it more. So I felt like I was missing a joke, but you just did the Tennessee Williams thing about well, and that the fact that was like the end of the show, that last musical number doesn't even seem to make sense as far as the whole like growing old or whatever.
Right? It's just it's weird, but that whole scene is interesting to me is because I almost am just like, Goldie Hawn, are you a masochist or whatever? Helen, are you a masochist? Because she's like, I brought you here to see if you could resist her charm. Why would you do that? Just hope he never runs into her. This is before the internet.
Maybe don't be friends with her anymore. Don't go to her shows, and maybe move elsewhere. She was a writer, so there was no need for her to be in New York or what. Like, I guess maybe it was also like the 70s, so maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it's like, I mean, if you have a writing agent and you're like a successful writer, you should be able to live anywhere.
Right.
And, I don't know. I'm fully with you on that. It's very weird for someone to want to tempt fate like that. And then get so upset about it. Like
It's like, what did you think was gonna happen?
Well, and also it's like you should be looking for someone who loves you for you, right? So if he runs off with her as soon as he gets a chance, it's like, why are you even so upset about it? Like you're fine. You should go. And I understand that's also part of the character. That's where the comedy comes from. Is it's like she is so like she can't stop caring about this woman who shouldn't have any sort of impact on her life,
right?
And it's funny, but it's like, you know, sadly there are people like that.
Yeah,
it's like, just stop worrying about what they're up to, and if the person leaves you for your best friend, maybe just move on, because that person would probably have cheated on you anyway. Like, why? Ugh. That was probably the most. That was so
cringy. That was just so cringy.
The movie kind of hard swaps over to Bruce Willis and Meryl Streep's character, so it kind of, yeah, at that point you sort of forget about Goldie Hawn's character for a while. But like up until the point where she's at the hospital, I'm just like, why are you even upset by this? But that's the point.
Yeah, my favorite part about that is she's like, she must end. And she just kind of just goes on this psycho spiral, and I'm just like, why are you letting her out?
Well, what I thought was going to be, again, up until she tries to murder Meryl Streep, I was on her side, and when she's reintroduced into the plot, and she's sort of telling Bruce Willis and Meryl Streep the same thing,
yeah,
I thought she was going to play them against each other.
I think that,
and that would have been cool. I thought that was like maybe where the thing was going, but then it's like, oh no, she's just gonna murder her, which is fine. Again, like I don't really have a problem with the story in this movie, but at that point I did not really have any sympathy for her anymore.
Well, and speaking of Bruce Willis's character, Bruce Willis was actually not the first choice to play the male lead in this movie. Originally, they wanted Kevin Kline, who turned it down. He went on to do, at that time, the movie Dave, which is a fun movie also. If you ever get a chance to watch that, it's fun. And then Jeff Bridges actually auditioned for the part, and he was turned down.
Jeff Bridges I love him, and I bet he would have been good in this, but I don't know. I like, as far as like skeezy, like plastic surgeon type, maybe not Jeff Bridges.
But I could totally see Kevin Kline in this role very easily.
For sure.
And he actually also lent it's sad, I don't know how true this is, but I've read online that he actually came up with the title for the movie, because the original titles they were considering was It's Death Baby and My Man Death, which,
yuck.
Yeah.
I love the title. That's actually, like, it's so clever. I don't, like, whoever came up with it, whether it was the screenwriters or someone else, like, it's so clever. I like, ever since you brought it up, and also after watching the movie, and like, it works so well with the story it's telling too, because she becomes death, but also death becomes her, because after being dead she doesn't age.
Exactly.
So she, you know, it's like it's I'm at a loss for words even. It's such a clever title. I really like it. So whoever came up with that.
I have one last surprise for you before I kind of want to get into discussing, you know, its cult status and, you know, some of the themes in the movie. So what's interesting is the end of this movie is very iconic, but it was not the original ending for the movie. When it was first shown to test audiences, it had a completely different ending. But audiences hated it, the original ending, saying that it was too happy. So it had a completely different ending, and the ending of the movie has never been released to the public, so we've never seen it. There are snippets of it that exist in the movie trailer, but it's so I'm going to read to you. So there have been people who have put out online what it actually was, like people who've worked in the movie and stuff. So I found this on IMDb, so I'm going to read this word for word. It says,
I'm morbidly curious.
Right? So they're saying the original ending was overall different from the theatrical version. It involves Tracy Ullman's character, Tony, who was a character that was cut entirely because the ending was completely removed. Helping Ernest in a ruse of faking his own death in order to get away from Madeline, Helen, and Liesel. The plan worked, and the two ended up running away to Europe to start a new life together. Many years later, Madeline and Helen, both parodies of their former selves, with cracked and peeling paint and putty covering most of their gray rotting flesh, are on vacation in Switzerland. Yet they are completely bored and miserable. They notice an elderly couple being affectionate, and they become envious of them. As the couple gets into the car and drives away, Madeline and Helen realize it's Ernest and Tony and chase after them, only to be hit by an oncoming car and break into pieces, similar to the theatrical ending. Which I'm actually kind of like curious as to why they like the final ending better than this ending, because to me they're essentially they're the same. Yeah, they're the same in spirit. Because
pretty much, like, even saying it's happier, I'm like, why? Because we see him live out the rest of his life. I mean, we know that happens in the original ending anyway. So how is that? Well, I guess this is not the original. In the theatrical ending, we know he lived out his life happily. So how is that even any
right?
difference?
So that's kind of. But I'm like, this one actually kind of. I actually kind of like this ending because it's to me it adds. But because we could see them, it adds a little bit more sweetness. But for the most part, in substance, it's pretty much similar to what we got. Why
am I forgetting who Tony is? Who was Tony again?
Tony was a character that was cut entirely. She existed only in this ending. She was played by Tracy Ullman. And you see her briefly in the trailer. She's essentially a bartender that Bruce Willis runs. He's at a bar after all the events, I think, at the party take place.
Okay.
And
honestly, I think it was a budgetary thing, because also too, like, if you're like, oh, they're taking a vacation in Switzerland, now you either have to shoot in Switzerland or you have to make a set that looks like Switzerland, and having Tracy Ullman come on as another character, now that's a salary you have to pay.
But like but they'd already shot this. And they'd shown it,
really?
Yeah, and they'd shown this ending as the ending to the test audience. You know, when you go to like a test screening. And
why did the test audience hate it, though?
I have no idea, unless these people are saying what are saying are wrong, but because I've just seen different variations of the same sort of ending that people say is what the original ending was. But to me, like, I'm almost like, what was so hateable about this? Because, like I said, it's basically the same ending that we get there, except I guess the characters are more bitchy in this ending.
Yeah, honestly, that's so puzzling, because just based on the description, it sounds like the same ending, just with a couple of... to me, if I were to... It can't be budgetary, so they already paid Tracy Ullman to not be in the movie.
Mm-hmm. She was in the trailer, too.
If I were an executive at the time, I would have been like, you better use that footage.
Use it
Find
somewhere.
a way to make the audience like that ending, because otherwise...
Well, like the picture at the funeral of, we see the young Bruce Willis and the old Bruce Willis. The old Bruce Willis, that was actually a screen capture of him in makeup from that scene that they used for that. So, like, that's the most that they use. But it's interesting, because if you watch the trailer for the movie, they actually say in the trailer, Ernest is dead, everyone's dead. Because that's what like I said, he fakes his death in this, and then like we get to see the conversation happen between him and Tracy Ullman in the trailer. And there's some other scenes in the trailer that were cut. They said it was for pacing. One of them is, I don't know why they did this, but they had Meryl Streep's character, Bruce Willis puts her in the freezer for whatever reason, and there's a scene in the trailer where he takes her out and she's like, I feel like I'm sweating, and he's like, you're not sweating, you're defrosting. There were some scenes that were cut but the ending, like I said, if this is truly how the ending was, what really is the difference between what we got?
This is the kind of thing where I feel like it is useful to have multiple cuts, like as special features or something, or at least have deleted scenes.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks that this movie isn't popular enough that they like kept that stuff and put them on the DVD, because that's the sort of thing that could end up making people be like, oh, this would have been a better version or something. Because already a lot of this sounds like I would have liked the movie a lot more if there was another character and another storyline going on, and definitely more gags with the whole dead body stuff. Like that was something, if there was more of that in the movie, I would have gladly appreciated it.
I think no. Meryl Streep said in one of her interviews promoting the movie that the movie had a different ending that she said was quote more moralistic end quote, and she said they junked it. So I don't know. I'm still confused as to why. Because, like I said, they sound exactly the same, just different scenes, but they're accomplishing the
Yeah,
same task.
you and I sound like we have exactly the same opinion because every time it's like I'm just puzzled by what people are, Meryl Streep or whoever is saying because I'm just like, it's the same ending. It's just there's a couple of details changed, but he's happy, and then they end up bumping into each other and crashing into a bunch of pieces. Like it's the same ending. Like how is it more moralistic that he's not at a funeral, like he's not dead at a funeral? I don't know. It's again, this is why it would be cool to see the original cut, because then I'd actually have an opinion on it, and maybe I'd be like, you're all crazy, I think this is the better version of the movie, or maybe I'd understand what they're talking about, but just based on the stuff that they're saying, it makes no sense.
Well, you've heard our call to action, listeners. Release the Zemeckis cut.
Yes.
So
release the Tracy Ullman cut.
Justice for Tracy Ullman. So with talking about technical stuff, let's get more to like the themes of the movie. So this is really interesting because it's quite obvious, what the message is about. It's almost like sort of like a cautionary tale about basically being envious of what others have, prizing beauty above all else. And it's interesting. What I think interesting, and this was actually pointed out to me by In Frame Out, was the fact that Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn, they basically are essential for Bruce Willis's character. All they basically serve to be are trophy wives. That's literally like the only reason he would keep them around. Basically objects of beauty and everything, and essentially they're there to suit his needs. But the moment the script is flipped and he has to be there for their needs, and he essentially becomes for them the trophy husband for whatever reason, he loses his mind. And I think that's really interesting that they did that. They were like, this is our entire existence, not only in Hollywood and everything just to be trophy babes, but the second that you have to put work into maintaining us, then it becomes you go nuts. I thought that was kind of a really interesting thing, and I wanted to see what you think about that.
I do. I also think, like, and I'm sure this is on your list of themes, but I after having seen the movie, I wasn't surprised that it's big in the LGBTQ plus community because it touches on a lot of things like that seem to be kind of, like with trans people and like not feeling comfortable in your own body or like wanting to become someone else and other things. And it's interesting. And Bruce, yeah, I know what you mean too. Like Bruce Willis's character, I honestly, I feel like I didn't dig too deep into a lot of the themes and like analyzing the movie because it was just kind of, he's a dick. That was my, like I'm not thinking too hard about it. Like, oh, he wants to abandon them because they are dead bodies now.
Yeah.
And he doesn't actually love them because he never did.
Well, if you look at Isabella Rossellini's character, Liesel, she basically represents the epitome of what these women want to be. They want to be these powerful, gorgeous women. That are the apple of every man's eye. And what's interesting about the way her character dynamic and her household set up is she's, the leader, and she has the men that are around her are like the trophy men. And they're basically essentially just supposed to be props. Even if you look at the characters, are only named Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah, I actually loved that. I saw that in the credits. Also, I loved that, I didn't recognize the other two, but one of her little boyfriends was Fabio.
Yes, Fabio.
They got Fabio to be a butler in this. Extra emphasis on the butt.
So going back to this having a place in the community, this is actually something that, as a member of the community, it almost kind of baffles me. So the Vanity Fair put out an article called "The Gloriously Queer Afterlife of Death Becomes Her," and they talk about how this movie has become basically a cornerstone of LGBT cinema, so much so that there have been essentially 2 challenges one challenge on RuPaul's Drag Race revolving around this movie. And they talk about how drag queens in particular are a movie. This is a movie that they love, and they even talk to the writers, and the writers don't understand why this is such a big deal to LGBTQ plus people. They said they don't know, but they think it may be because the community is often attracted to tales of struggle and resilience, and about people who never giving up even if it's a mess. But
I mean, has anyone actually asked the community?
Well,
I'd
they
be kind
do.
of more interested in what the drag queens have to say about it, because I kind of get it. Like I said, I couldn't really, articulate what I'm thinking, partly because I'm not I'm not a member of the community.
Spoiler alert.
But it's
sorry.
I consider myself an ally, but I can't say that I've gone through the same struggles. But I'd be much more interested to hear.
So,
A drag queen who really likes this movie, it's like, well, what spoke to you about it? Because it is interesting. I like, having seen it, I'm not surprised, but I also can't really explain why I'm not surprised. I guess it's mostly like, I think those two main characters I could see being like someone's drag character.
Well, so
you know what I mean?
So there are two quotes in here. One's from Tom Campbell, who is an executive producer of Drag Race. And they say that ahead of its time in a lot of ways, because they have these conversations about looks and what they're willing to do to our bodies for what we are willing to do to our bodies for beauty. And I think it's only multiplied exponentially since that movie was made. Further down in the article, let me see. It says season 5 winner Jarek Hoffer, whose drag persona Jinx Monsoon embodied Streep's acid blonde for a Death Becomes Her theme photo shoot. He said that he ties Helen and Madeline to a lineage of beloved bad women who dared to be both divinely stylish and unrepentantly ambitious. He says, I think this is a trait, and I apologize if I'm using the wrong pronouns. I don't know this person that well, so actually I'm going to switch to they at this point. So they say, I think this is a trait that runs through the queer community, the obsession with the hyper-feminine female villains. And we see it in Disney movies and in movies like Death Becomes Her and in characters like Poison Ivy and Catwoman. Almost all the Disney villain witches are gay icons, like Sleeping Beauty's Maleficent with her cold cackle and cool cape, or Little Mermaid's octopus Ursula, whose design was reportedly inspired by the defiant drag queen Divine. I think it's a combination of it being a strong female character who you love how evil she is, Hoffer said. I don't know why that is a trait that appeals to queer people so much, but it's pretty consistent among the queer community. I think it has something to do with feeling like outcasts and imagining yourself in this position of power where even though you're the outcast, you still have some kind of power and strength within you. They're fighting for beauty. They're against the system. They're also villains, but we understand their complexity. We root for the undead divas because we're trying to win a game that's rigged against them. And to borrow an apocryphal quote from Ginger Rogers, they sort of have to do it backwards and in high heels. So,
I love that. I don't know who that was, but that was perfectly put, and that makes so much sense. And they talked about stuff I've kind of observed myself, like they said with the Disney queens being kind of big, and especially, I mean, Ursula. Everyone knows that was divine. And it's not even. It's the animators came out and said it like this was. And that's another movie I was thinking of getting you to watch, but I feel like you might not be able to handle it as Pink Flamingos.
I know about the iconic poop eating scene.
Oh, there's so much more. That movie is cursed. I watched it in high school just because it's like, it's something you watch as like a dare. It's one of those art house movies from the 70s that would go on like midnight screenings and stuff. But Divine is so funny. Her character is so beyond messed up that it's just, I think I even sent you like that clip of her being like, kill everybody, advocate cannibalism.
I remember that.
Oh my God.
So what's interesting about this point of view is, that makes a lot of sense. They're talking about people who are hyper feminine, who are powerful, who make decisions for themselves. But at the same time, the article also goes on to say, like any cult classic, the key to truly appreciating Death Becomes Her is rewatching it. It's about beauty. It's about a rivalry of women. It's about one-liners. And what's interesting to me about that quote is that kind of also, to me, is almost, to me, that kind of flies in the face of sort of what people are saying they loved about it in the community. Because essentially what that's saying is that, and I think what the movie's also saying is what these women are nothing more than how they look. And that they don't really have any depth beyond that. And to me, that's kind of like, ooh, is that really a message? And again, I'm not like the spokesperson for the queer community.
I don't think that's the message. I think that's how they feel. You know what I mean? And especially like with drag queens or people transitioning, or even to some extent people in the, gay community, like I do think appearance is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the point, one of the points, at least that person you were reading from.
Oh, yeah.
Really, I understand, because like, I do, well, not personally understand, but like the lengths that you go to for your beauty. Like I've seen this shit that like drag queens have to do to look the way they do. And it is uncomfortable and painful. And it's like, this is what you're doing to achieve that standard you want, so that makes a ton of sense, especially like this potion where it's like, oh, now you have to basically like get someone to paint you every couple of years so you don't look like a corpse,
or in their case basically every half hour almost.
Well, the funny thing, like the potion does not turn you into a corpse. The reason they're corpses is because they're idiots, the two of them. Like they're so busy trying to kill each other. Like none of the people at that Hollywood party are dead, including Isabella Rossellini. Like as she said, take care of your bodies. The only reason they are in the predicament they are in is because they did it themselves. They're trying to kill each other. If they had just behaved themselves, then they would have perfectly young, beautiful bodies that they would have to take care of, but they wouldn't be rotting apart. So that's kind of funny too.
And that's interesting, because that's actually kind of like where I was coming at this from. Is I can totally see this being a part of the LGBTQ plus cinema, sort of not the word I'm looking for, but repertoire. And what's interesting to me about what is basically what you just said is the two women that are being idolized in this movie. I almost kind of think this should be a sort of like campfire story for LGBTQ plus people, like, because to me what these two women embody are what I consider some of the more toxic parts of the LGBTQ plus community, which is this obsession with beauty and youth and this cattiness that exists within the community. So
for sure. Well, and also like, and I'm sure someone will get mad at me for saying this, because I'm not trying to say like women are toxic or something, but a lot has been said of toxic masculinity, which is a thing. Mm-hmm. There are definitely masculine traits that are toxic. I do think there is kind of a flip side to that, where there are good feminine traits and toxic ones as well.
Yes.
The same way, like with a man being, violent, or being, lots of things. There's lots of toxic masculine traits, but in the same way, like women have a tendency to like want to compete with each other for, attention of men. Not in all cases, but it's kind of something that's socialized, and also kind of the vanity and everything like that, so I feel like that's sort of, in fact, actually not even like you're a Wonder Woman fan, so I can even put this in superhero terms. Like, as Wonder Woman was supposed to be kind of all that is good about a woman, Cheetah, like her character in the comics, and from what I understand the movie, mm-hmm. is supposed to be like all of the worst traits of a woman. And that's why she's like Wonder Woman's arch nemesis, is because she's like the anti-woman.
She's toxic. She's toxic femininity.
Because that you're toxic.
But like,
Britney's out of her conservatorship too. I don't know if we're ever going to bring that up in a future episode, but since it happened recently, might as well say that here.
But To me, it's interesting to me to see people take positive things. I'm excited people can take positive and they can feel welcome in this movie, and it was just interesting to me because it's almost like it's a cautionary tale to the LGBTQ plus community about what can happen if you let yourself be consumed with this impossible search for beauty and youth that we do have as a problem in our community that we are obsessed with. So to me, that was just kind of interesting to see that people are empowered by it. And I like that because that means that they're seeing something that I'm not seeing.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I'm not officially like a member of the community, but one thing I can relate to, and something that's kind of worth talking about as far as, again, if anyone is into like screenwriting or anything who listens to the show, there is a difference. They say that you should write all of your characters so that you like them. Even if they are the villain, you should like the character. There should be something likable about them. And that's kind of the way, like, as I said, I really like comedies where everyone is a jerk and they're kind of getting in their own way and stuff. Like, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is one of my favorite TV shows. But that's the thing. Like, these characters, all three of them are just toxic, horrible people, but they're likable. Mm-hmm. You can relate to Goldie Hawn feeling jealous. You can relate to Meryl Streep not wanting to get old. You can relate to Bruce Willis's career having gone down the toilet. Like, even though as people they are giant pieces of shit, like they are likable pieces of shit, and that's something I think is worth kind of remembering if you're looking to write a character who is evil or maybe kind of the protagonist but not a good person. Is you should have something to connect to, even if the sum of their parts they are a bad person. Like, you should make them likable.
Yes, something.
And this
about
applies
them...
to other movies as well. Like, I was talking about Thanos earlier from the MCU, and a lot of people were talking about how, despite what he did was bad, it made a lot of sense, quote unquote, and that's good writing. It's like, what's his motivation and does it make sense? And it's kind of the same thing with these characters. Like, they're all jerks, but it makes sense and you can understand what they're feeling and going through.
So with that being said, with our discussion wrapping up there, Whiskey, is this a recommend from you?
Oh, I've said it multiple times. This is a good one. If you ever want to watch this during any time, honestly, I'd be down to rewatch this. I think it's a good Halloween movie too. I might even make it a regular thing if I'm in the mood for something funnier.
I was glad.
So definitely recommend. Especially like if you have never heard of this movie, check it out because it's definitely kind of a delightful little surprise for me.
And they used to show it all the time on Bravo, back when Bravo still showed things. That's how I saw it.
Besides trying to copy TLC with their own reality garbage.
Oh, come on. I want to know what a Real Housewife does. So this is
why I can't hate the characters in this movie, is because they're not real. The characters from the Real Housewives are the characters from this movie if they were real.
Isn't that terrifying?
Oh my god.
But yeah,
Except they didn't take the potion because they age every season. Oops.
Oh, plot twist. See,
oops.
They didn't get that special exclusive club. Well, what's interesting, really quickly, now that you bring that up, one of the drafts of the screenplay, Isabella Rossellini's character Liesel reveals that she originally started this, I guess, to preserve people who she found, intellectually important. So I think in that version, like she had gotten like William Shakespeare and Abraham Lincoln and people like that to take the potion, and eventually they all turned on her basically because living forever sucks is basically what they did, and so she kills them off. How she has a way to kill them off, I guess, which would explain more about why she's trying to kill off Bruce Willis's character, because that's not ever like fully explained why she wants to kill him. But that's kind of like where that there was.
I don't think, did she want to kill him? I thought she just wanted to like stop him from getting out or something. I didn't think they were gonna. I don't know. Maybe I missed that. But I don't know. I kind of like this version of her better in that case because it makes more sense that she'd want to make money off of it. Mm-hmm.
I want to know how much money
Especially
though she was going to charge. She was going to charge Meryl Streep for that because
a lot.
yeah, a lot
apparently.
because it was enough to where Meryl Streep, who has her character has tons of money, was like, okay, yeah, right. But then she somehow still managed to have enough. So
No, I liked that. I liked how she also kind of started by saying, "Oh, I want to preserve people I think are important or whatever," but then it just comes down to money.
yeah,
Like, you know, she was my favorite character in the movie. I would be down to see more of her.
well,
And it was also nice to see, like, again, I knew Isabella Rossellini's acting career did take off after Blue Velvet,
Yeah.
but I hadn't really seen her in a lot. So it was nice to see her in something where she's not, being beaten.
which
And
yeah,
she's like a
God,
powerful character.
That's so
And also nice to see that her acting career did take off, because that's something, because we haven't talked about Blue Velvet because we haven't reviewed it, but that was something that kind of pissed me off as far as Ebert's review is, like, he kind of unintentionally hurt her career by saying, like, oh, it's horrible what happened to her. And it's like, she's like, I mean, I'm an actress, I was acting.
Well, because I think in her case, unlike with what happened in The Last Tango in Paris, she was aware of what was going on. There was no surprises.
Well, it was a movie. Again, it's like I showed you like the behind the scenes of that and stuff, and it's just like, yeah, Last Tango in Paris is a completely, and that's funny too, because I think Ebert likes that movie.
Oh, what a psycho!
So, oh my goodness, the fake violence is bad, but the real violence, oh my god. But yeah, no, like in Blue Velvet, it's like they were joking in between takes,
yeah,
because they were professionals and no one was actually being abused.
Right. So I'm gonna go ahead and obviously I give this a recommend. This is, like I said, this is one of these first, like, sort of campy movies I remember ever seeing. That whole shovel scene, that's like, I was actually shocked because it's been a while since I've seen it and how far in the movie that happens. I was expecting that to happen sooner.
I also really like the shot of Meryl Streep clawing the I don't know, like the support beam thing in her mansion and, like, actually making, like, a claw mark on it.
Yeah.
I love that. I don't know, like, this is a good watch. I think
it's a fun movie.
It's funny, and I think it could appeal to a lot of people. I'm more surprised, again, that it seems to have gone forgotten by anyone who's not, like, in the LGBTQ plus community. I never hear anyone talking about this, and I think it's a shame, because I don't think it's like a superb classic or anything, but as far as just raw good entertainment, I think it's a good time.
And I think one of these reviewers were like, it's not trying to be. No, it wasn't. It
Yeah,
was
exactly.
one of these people who's doing like a retrospective review on it. Like, this is a great movie. It's not trying or claiming to be anything great, but it still like manages to be good.
Exactly, like using another comedy as an example. It's like Dumb and Dumber is an excellent movie, but it's not high art.
Right.
It's a funny movie. And it's kind of the same thing with this.
So, any of your listeners who want to check it out, it is currently, as of recording, streaming for free with commercials on Peacock. But for the rest of you, totally worth the $2.99 or whatever it is to rent it.
Absolutely. And if you completely disagree with anything you've heard in this review, feel free to yell at us in the comments.
Yell at us in the comments. Yell at us on Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Both the good and the bad.
Like and subscribe, or don't. We don't care.
And take the potion.
One guard, bitch.
One last thing. I love that potion bottle, how it kind of just balanced on its little tip. I loved that.
Oh yeah,
that
no, we didn't really talk about the production design, but yeah, whoever made that prop, it was really cool looking.
Oh, one last thing, because you just mentioned that. In another draft of the script, her character was supposed to be like either an Egyptian goddess or like Cleopatra or something, which
makes perfect sense with the costume
exactly
design. And her haircut.
Exactly.
I was thinking Cleopatra.
So, like, subscribe, check it out. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you've enjoyed this installment of Reels on the Rocks, visiting Whiskey's Nightmare on the Rocks class. And
make sure to tip your plastic surgeon.
Yes, and your undertaker, just in case.
Just in case. All right, well, thanks for hanging with us, guys. We had a great time, and we've got another spooky little movie for next time. And looking forward to seeing you guys again.
See y'all. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.